What's a realistic trade that would net the Eagles a wide receiver? That's one of many of your questions we'll answer next in our midweek mailbag on the PHLY Eagles Show. Good afternoon and welcome to a midweek edition of the PHLY Eagles Show. I'm Zach Berman here with Rich Hofmann for my favorite type of show, or I should say one of my favorite types of shows, and that is a mailbag because we get to address what is on your mind. We are now 13 days away from Eagles training camp, so the countdown is on, as we discussed on yesterday's show. As we discussed on Monday's show, some of us prefer phone calls more than others. Some of us like phone calls more than others. If you watched Hard Knocks last night, Rich, or if you've seen the clips that are circulating, we saw Saquon Barkley's phone call with the New York Giants on the day that the franchise tag came out. I bring that up because we seem to chronicle that show quite a bit here. First off, how you doing on this Wednesday? Second off, what did you make of Saquon Barkley's reaction to the Giants calling him?
Well, I think he's anti-phone call, Zach. I think he was asking Joe Schoen to wrap it up, man.
Yep.
I think Saquon would have watched Monday's show and said, "You guys you're nailing it right now." Yeah, it was pretty awkward, and I will go back to what I said last week about it. I'm not going to give the Giants too much credit because I don't like the Giants, but they are giving like a lot of access that I am kind of surprised they are giving. That was awkward. It was tense. It was, I don't know. It was good television though. And Saquon's reaction was, I think it was fair, right? He was like, okay, maybe I'll come back to you. Maybe I won't. Like, I want to come back as a Giant. I don't know. It was good TV, but it was very awkward and tense, I thought.
First off, I thought the phone call itself was an evidence of what I said about phone calls. I enjoyed being on the phone. What I don't necessarily like is like the preamble and then the post, So Joe Schoen's clearly calling to tell him that they're going to let him hit the market. They're not putting the franchise tag on, right? And so you do the whole thing. Are you in Jersey? How's your offseason going? Like, let's just get to the point. There's a reason why you're calling. We don't need all the preamble there. Anyways, the phone call itself, I thought it was reasonable from both sides. I don't think that Saquon Barkley's obligated to bring an offer back to the Giants at that point.
Well, he's a free agent after all, right?
I think Saquon was fairly clear. Like, you guys know what my number is. Now, the Giants did the right thing there in terms of, all right, there's an impasse. We're not agreeing on the number. Go see what your market is, and if we can get close, we'll get close. That's a respectable strategy there. I thought there were some other parts of the show that I found more enlightening, but I think from an Eagles perspective, I thought that there's been this discrepancy in terms of, did the Giants make an offer? Did the Giants not make an offer? Saquon has kind of been clear that he did not. He said you can't turn your back on a team that didn't make you an offer. The Giants there did not make a formal offer, right? They were like, go see what your market is. So it certainly seemed too like the Giants didn't expect Saquon to get the type of money that he got from the Eagles. But
so you know this better. The one thing I was wondering about, because Joe Schoen in the phone call frames it as like, we're going to let you test the market. It seems like the right thing to do. Was it the right thing to do, or was the franchise tag for a second year kind of cost prohibitive for them?
Yeah, it's kind of, and look, the Eagles did this with Nick Foles a few years ago. Now, it wasn't necessarily
exactly.
But Howie Roseman gets up there at the combine. Actually, similar situation to if you watch the show, and I'm sorry, I'm giving away spoilers here, but you saw the Giants PR staff prep Joe Schoen for the combine press conference, and one of the things he said is, Well, the franchise tag's not out of the question, right? We're going to be very generic here. So if you go back to the 2019 offseason, there was this annoying, short, pesky reporter who specifically asked Howie Roseman, are you going to franchise tag Nick Foles? And Howie Roseman came there with news. Howie Roseman said, no, we think it's the right thing to do to let him hit the market, like all that he's done for us.
He's a franchise legend.
Yeah. The reality is it kind of would have been cost prohibitive for the Eagles to give him the tag. But, yeah, I don't think the tag was going to be an option there. The Giants clearly had some other orders of business they were going after. Brian Burns or Christian Wilkins. You saw that in the show. They had to figure out Xavier McKinney. If you put a franchise tag on someone, even if that player doesn't sign, there's a cap hold at that point. So, check that out. I imagine there will be many other references to, obviously, Saquon and the Eagles. I'm curious whether it's next week's episode or the week after that, the reaction when Saquon signs with the Eagles. I'm curious to see that.
Don't spoil it, as the comments. No, I'm just kidding. It's the idea of Hard Knocks offseason Giants spoilers is pretty funny. Yeah. Like, guys, Saquon's gone.
Saquon signed with the Eagles. We might have mentioned that once or twice on this show. Now, we solicited questions from our listeners, from our viewers on social media, and also our Discord channel, which you can be part of if you are a PHLY diehard member. I check Discord all the time. And so we're going to get to many of those questions here today. And we're going to combine a few of them and also kind of play off a few of them, because we got a few with the of the target trade candidate variety. So the one we are going to start with, and I'm going to kind of think out loud here, so I allowed Julia to put this on the screen, is from Ralph Jankowicz, which is, can you and Rich each propose a realistic trade that nets the Eagles a solid third wide receiver? Maybe it's one of our cornerbacks to a cornerback needy team, or just a future draft pick. And then I also want to call attention to, is it Sven Nashom? His question, if you could do a trade that would net a starter before the season, what trade would that be? Name specific players and why. That sounds like an assignment at school right there, but I appreciate that, Sven. So we're going to combine these two.
From one teacher to another?
from one visiting faculty member to another. So let's combine these two in terms of realistic trade candidates, but also or I should say realistic trade targets, but let's also expand this to realistic trade candidates.
So I don't have the exact framework, and unfortunately for Sven, like, if you made me propose a trade I'm looking for, it would be like Patrick Mahomes to Eagles for 6th round pick, maybe going the other way.
I would I would make it a 7.
Yeah, you don't have to give him too much, but the other team does have to accept. So one that kind of stood out, which Ralph mentioned, the framework is Eagles cornerback beyond probably the 2 rookies to a cornerback needy team. Now, I don't know if the Houston Texans are a cornerback needy team, but I know they are not a wide receiver needy team.
Good job there.
Yeah. And so I looked at their cornerback depth chart. Thank you to our lads, which I believe you just pulled up right now. They have Derek Stingley Jr. They're set there at one spot for sure. And they took rookie Kamari Lassiter in the second round.
From Georgia.
So why, if you have one Georgia cornerback, why don't you take 2? Why don't you get a little Keely Ringo for one of those extra wide receivers? And the name, and we mentioned this a little bit before the show, that came to mind for me was John Mechie. And in fairness, I didn't watch a ton of John Mechie. He had a pretty good playoff game against the Browns, I remember. But obviously had the health scare that made him sit out his first year, the slow start. But if you think about reading some of the stuff coming out of Texans OTAs, like CJ Stroud is gassing him up a little bit. He's playing well. It seems like he's full go. He's running good routes. Obviously, that needs to translate to the field. But it seems like he's in a good spot. He was a 2nd round pick, I believe. And to me, I guess the reason I like Mechie, Zach, and maybe there is another player that fits this mold around the league, but I like this because I saw this in the comments the other day. I just want competence from the number 3 wide receiver. And the scouting report looking at the beast like Dane Brugler what he had to say when Mechie was coming out of Alabama is that, like, he wasn't the highest ceiling prospect out there, but he's like a terrific route runner, somebody who knows how to get open, find those spaces in the defense. That sounds like the perfect guy to put in between Devontae Smith, who I guess was his college teammate.
And they're good friends. Actually, before the game 2 years ago, Devontae was wearing a John Mechie shirt in support of him while John Mechie was overcoming cancer.
Well, yeah. And by the way, the chat is saying they'd rather have Ringo. Maybe it's Isaiah Rodgers for Mechie. You know, like maybe that's the good thing about having all of this depth. And maybe Ringo just has like a tremendous training camp too, where the Eagles say, all right, we actually need to keep this guy. This guy might just be a good player. He might be the starter along with Quinion Mitchell or whatever. So, you know, guys, don't get too hung up over the framework here. But so the idea of trading for kind of a younger receiver who doesn't need to be like a game breaker type ceiling, but just somebody who knows how to get open, somebody who runs good routes. I would support trading for that type of player.
First off, I really like that in terms of the player they're acquiring. I like John Mechie quite a bit. I think John Mechie's a player that they could and should target, considering that the Texans have depth at that position. Obviously, they traded for Diggs. They gave Nico Collins big money. Tank Dell's coming back. So they kind of have their three. They re-signed Noah Brown. That's another one in there. Maybe you could say Robert Woods would be the player they'd be more apt to trade. But John Mechie, who was a second-round pick in 2022, like you mentioned, you're looking fourth, fifth receiver there. That would make sense. I think he could fit within the depth chart. I agree with the chat. I would not trade Kelee Ringo 1-for-1 for John Mechie. I think Kelee Ringo, given his age profile, given the position profile, given the role on the team, sorry about that, I would not make that move. But I certainly would call about him. The player I would float out there is Eli Ricks. And now you might say, why would they be trading for a second-round pick for Eli Ricks? Who was a player who they drafted in the second round for Eli Ricks, who was an undrafted player a year ago. I think Eli Ricks has upside as a corner. I think he showed that last year. I think he's someone who's kind of on the he's on the outside looking in of the depth chart at this point. So I think if they would be interested in Eli Ricks, that would be a way to go. It might be Eli Ricks plus a pick.
Yeah, Eli Ricks. Yeah, we're fine. Okay, you want to keep Ringo, but Eli Ricks is a pretty big drop off from Ringo.
Sure,
I would say.
I think Eli Ricks might have more value than Isaiah Rodgers from a contract perspective.
Okay, that's true.
Right. So you're looking at that, but yeah, I mean, Kelee Ringo was the youngest player on the team last year. He's a second-year player. He's under contract for 3 more seasons. But no, I certainly like that. So with the Texans, you would prefer Mechie to Robert Woods. You would prefer kind of the younger profile to the established veteran.
I mean, I generally would, yeah. I mean, I think Robert Woods provides competency, but it's, I don't know, maybe just listening to Bo over the years and just recycling all of these older players. I understand there is a little bit of risk. Like, look, John Mechie only had like 200 yards last year receiving. So he's really not proven a lot. But the framework of trying to go after, in the NBA, they call it like a second draft candidate, right? Where, a player doesn't work out at their first spot for whatever reason, but was drafted highly, has a good skill set and maybe would flourish in another place, something like that along those lines. So I think I would prefer that. But like Robert Woods is competent, right? His numbers have trended down since the heyday of his career, those Rams years when he and Cooper Kupp and McVay and all those guys were just throwing the ball all over the place. But I think I'd rather go for a younger player, which is why Treylon Burks also is an interesting name.
Yeah, so that's why I was about to get into there. And the player I would target from a similar type of profile, profile would be Treylon Burks in Tennessee, former first-round pick. Who, if you want to know what the Titans think of Treylon Burks, you can read their comments, which is supportive of him, or you can watch their actions, which would tell you otherwise. This offseason, they've added Calvin Ridley, they've added Tyler Boyd, right? So they add 2 veterans there. Treylon Burks is probably on, I don't want to say the outside looking in, but he's their 4th or 5th receiver now. When you consider they already have DeAndre Hopkins, so Treylon Burks, I imagine, is very much available. He's someone who I like coming out of Arkansas. The Titans literally drafted him with the pick they got from the Eagles in the A.J. Brown deal, but it has not worked out so far. So you'd say, what's the price? Okay, well, this is the kind of thing I like looking up. As you know, I like putting on my GM hat. I would look at the Jalen Reagor price so what the Eagles paid, what the Vikings paid to get Jalen Reagor. And why did I pick those? Well, through 2 years, both for first-round picks, their first 2 years, similar types of seasons. When you look at the 17-game pace, Treylon Burks has 38 catches, 514 yards on per 17 games. If you want to go kind of with the NBA per 82 game thing, and then Jalen Reagor through his first 2 seasons was 39 catches, 422 yards. Both kind of disappointing first-round picks where they were. So what did the Vikings give up? The Vikings gave up a 2023 7th-round pick and a 2024 5th-round pick that could have turned into a 4th-round pick had Jalen Reagor achieved certain conditional stats, 40 receptions, 500 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns. So if you're ostensibly looking at it from this point as a 2024 7th-round pick and a 2025 5th-round pick, that is a trade I would make. You kind of talked about that profile in the NBA. I love that profile in the NFL. It's something that Bo always makes fun of me about, kind of going for the former first-round pick. I like kind of taking a chance on talent, and I think Treylon Burks fits that. I also think Treylon Burks is an interesting type of player from a he's different in terms of like the size profile. Maybe you need to manufacture touches. That was kind of a criticism for him coming out of Arkansas. But I don't mind that. I think he's a unique player who in his second stint or in his second team could be more productive than his first team.
I just looked at his career. The only touchdown of his career was that catch against the Eagles, which is the thumbnail where he got absolutely crunched.
He got hurt on the play. Yeah. I believe it was Marcus Epps and Josiah Scott and they kind of crunched him and he still caught that touchdown.
Yeah.
So, A.J. Brown went off that day.
He did. So, Treylon Burks unfortunately had to go. The Titans were saying he was going to match him 1 for 1, but he didn't, and he never has. Besides that sequence of events has worked out for the Eagles, I would say.
Yeah, and I know Eagles fans say like the Titans wouldn't want to make a trade with the Eagles, because of what happened with A.J. Brown. Look, it's a different GM. This is not the GM that drafted Treylon Burks. This is not the GM that traded A.J. Brown. So I think Treylon Burks is the type of player I would target, whether he's an upgrade over Paris Campbell. You can have that debate, but the Eagles do have a need at third receiver, and I think either Treylon Burks or John Mechie would make sense there. To kind of stay on this year, who do you think would be a trade candidate for the Eagles? So let's say they went out and they acquired a wide receiver, spent some draft capital, and Howie says, look, if we're going to make a trade, then we need to add some draft capital back. So what's a position of surplus? You mentioned cornerback there. Obviously, the name that keeps going out is James Bradberry. I don't know what realistically they could get from James Bradberry. I know there's kind of buzz. Pittsburgh has Cam Sutton down right now because of suspension. I don't know if you trade for James Bradberry to be a second type of or to be a backup corner. But is there a player who you think makes sense for the Eagles as a potential trade candidate?
I mean, like you said, Eli Ricks is somebody. And like, look, if the Eagles don't want to trade towards the top of that cornerback depth chart, then you start working your way down the list. Like, does Josh Jobe have any?
Yeah, I mean, from a
played some games.
Yes, special teams perspective, I think he's more of a waiver wire claim. But look, I told the story on the show before. There was a player a few years ago who I don't want to say I was pumped that I got this scoop because you don't want to. I mean, you're like reporting on a player losing his job, but I hear they're going to cut this guy, and so I go and I do my work, and someone in the organization says, hey, don't run with this. They're going to trade him. And I'm like, there's no way they're going to trade this player. Like, no one's going to trade for him. And sure enough, they traded the player. So Howie knows how to get something out of nothing sometimes.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing for Bradberry, although it's, as you have mentioned, like, I wonder if teams are just going to wait for the Eagles to cut him. And then, as somebody who is experienced, if you want to bring him in, he should be able to pick up the playbook and things pretty quickly.
Yeah, Bo mentioned Nakobe Dean as a potential trade candidate if the Eagles, if he does not win the starting job, if Zach Bond's the starter, or if Dean does not distinguish himself, Dean might still have some buzz from the draft. As far as one other trade target, I would say Levi. I'm sorry, I worked on the pronunciation. You heard me working on it. Levi Onwuzurike. From the Detroit Lions, okay, who was drafted. He's entered the final year of his deal. He's a backup now. I liked him coming out of Washington. He's a penetrating defensive tackle. He's kind of on the outs with the Lions, it seems. Players entering the last years of their deal, sometimes you can get them. I think D tackle is a position where the Eagles can use some help. I see in the chat, I was talking to you, but I see in the chat now how Kevin Everett Jr. says low-key need D-line depth too. And I think Levi fits kind of the age profile. Fits the player profile in terms of like that penetrating D tackle as a backup to Milton Williams. Kind of, if Milton goes down or if Jalen Carter goes down, you could say Moro Hojimo fits that role. I don't know if I would necessarily trade for a backup nose tackle, but that's a player that would make sense for me.
Here's a question: would you consider trading for a linebacker? Let's say one of them get hurt. Like, let's say Zach Bond got hurt and Nakobe didn't really show a lot, and you're sitting there with, all right, you have Devin White, you have Trot Jr., has not played in the NFL and, is a later round pick. So even if he's good, you might not expect, for him to start right away. Would you consider maybe trading? Because they did go the free agency route in training camp last year. They did okay. Zach Cunningham, right, was a starter for a lot of the year. But that was a position of weakness for them as well.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, that is something I would look at. I think linebacker is a spot where they have options, but they don't really have like entrenched. All right, you feel really good about this, and there is.
I don't know what the trade market is like. Are those guys costly? Like somebody who's
typically not. I mean, a top of the market player would be like, obviously Roquan Smith commanded a lot in the open market.
Competency.
Yeah, but for competency, no, you can probably get competency. But I think from Howie's perspective, and I certainly can't speak for Howie, but sometimes you say like, all right, could you just sign Zach Cunningham? Like, is the replacement level player on the open market? Is that the path to go as opposed to sacrificing a pick for a linebacker? I think they feel like you can get replacement level production at the position.
I got to say, I am a little worried how much is riding on Devin White this year. Yeah, I know a couple years ago, good player on some really good defenses, good teams. That's a lot riding on him as kind of your one entrenched option, because it's like you said, there are a lot of question marks. Like Nakobe Dean, first off, we don't know if he's really any good. Yep. We certainly don't know if he can stay healthy. Zach Bond was signed ostensibly to play another position, and we're kind of just bumping him over here now. And then, a rookie. I don't know. Devin White for, a signing on, what was that, the second or third day of NFL free agency? And, with somebody who I think you were a little bit higher on it than Bo was. It just
is usually the case.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's giving me I'm a little scared thinking about that, where, after the debacle of last year and after like the 49ers game and just how, the Cowboys game, like how easy it was to throw on the Eagles in the middle of the field. It's I'm a little bit worried about that. That's all.
That's a reasonable question. And of course this, somewhere around the world, I don't want to say where, Bo's listening to this and I mention this name, he'll throw something and he'll say, he'll rip on me to his wife. And look, I get it. I'm not advocating for this move, but kind of a move that I always thought was interesting was like, what if Jamal Adams played linebacker? I'm just saying, I've always kind of thought about that. Like, what if you played Jamal Adams as like a blitzing linebacker who, is covering tight ends? I'm not saying the Eagles should do it, but that's always kind of been like a back of the mind type move I have thought about. But trading for a linebacker is not necessarily something I think that they would do. But certainly if Devin White does not pan out this summer, that is a clear need for the Eagles. Before we continue with our next questions, and I enjoyed that discussion, let's get to Game Time here, because I'm speaking about Game Time not just as someone who is reading reading an ad, but as someone who literally uses Game Time. If you searched on my phone for the most recently used apps, Game Time would be one of them, because I purchased tickets recently with Game Time. And the reason I did it is because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. I did not necessarily heed that advice because I saw a good deal on Game Time. I'm taking my son to an Orioles game on Sunday against the Yankees, and I found a good deal on the Game Time app for that. But if I wanted to wait, if I woke up Sunday morning and I'm like, you know what, let's take the drive down to Camden Yards. I know they have killer last-minute deals. They have all-in prices. They have views from your seats and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They have, like I said, those last-minute deals, which allows you to save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater near you. They have flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing. The feature I always talk about is the seat view, because especially when you're, if I'm going to Citizens Bank Park, I know what it's going to look like, right? But if I'm going to a ballpark, I've been to Camden Yards as press box. I haven't been in Camden Yards as seats.
Stadium.
I want to make sure that I'm not sitting in an obstructed view seat or anything like that. And that's where that seat view really comes in. And I always enjoy a lowest price guarantee. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you're not getting the lowest price. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code PHLY for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code PHLY for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. And then also, I always enjoy talking about our friends at TrueMark, because they're headquartered where Julia went to high school. TrueMark, there's so many great things about TrueMark Financial Credit Union. If you use TrueMark's financial budgeting tools to save for special purchases like limited edition merchandise, regular contributions accumulate over time to reach savings goals effectively. You can transfer as little as $5 a week to give you $260, more than enough for your Kelly Green jersey, and that's using their, you can get the home equity line of credit, which allows homeowners to borrow against home equity with variable interest rates. Preserve your savings and you can get access to funds as needed for big renovations, education expenses, or emergencies. TrueMark Financial is federally insured by the NCUA and is an equal opportunity lender. For more information, visit truemark.com/PHLY.
So that discussion made me think too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, don't trade Ringo for Mechie. I do wonder what the Eagles season will look like though, if 3 of the 4 of those outside corners are actually really good, and either Avante or Cooper DeJean are competent inside. Is there a chance that Darius Slay is the 3rd best corner on the team?
Well, it's a non-zero. Like there was a possibility for that, right? I don't think that's the case. I think Slay still has talent, but cornerback
last year wouldn't have been
as we saw at Bradberry last year. Like cornerback's a position where you can fall off
the cliff, yeah,
right. And the split second, if you lose a bit of speed, that could hurt you there. So I am curious to see. I do like Quinyon Mitchell, and I do like Cooper DeJean. I do like Keely Ringo, but I still think Slay is their clear top option.
Yeah, if he doesn't fall off that cliff. And frankly, he has the profile of a guy who's just been very athletic for a lot of his career. I mean, he's kind of defied the age curve already, right? For him to be this good at this age. But it's, I guess, because, excuse me, Zach, because of what happened to Bradberry last year, my antenna is up for that, because that was he was a very good player, and then he was frankly not an NFL player for a lot of last year. So
that's certainly worth having the antenna up for. Before we get to the next question, was there a super chat, Julia, that we must address or that we should address here? How about a 2-player package, Ricks and Bradberry? I honestly don't think Bradberry has a lot of value. I think Bradberry is the kind of thing where the Eagles would just want to give him away because there's some cash and cap savings if they were to trade him as opposed to cutting him.
Do the right thing for him.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I don't think Bradberry's like a sweetener in a deal. I don't think it's the type of thing where it's like you're not gonna agree to Mechie for Ricks, so maybe we'll throw Bradberry in there too. I don't think that's the way it would work. I think the pick is a sweetener more so than Bradberry. I actually think maybe if you really want to get Bradberry off the books, you attach a pick to Bradberry, but I don't think that they're. I think in that case they would just eat the salary.
It's only like $1 million, right? Extra?
If they trade him, yeah. They say like $1 million extra. I don't think they would pay that for like a 7th round pick.
Yeah, that's
6th round pick.
Yeah.
The next one here, and I'm honestly, it's a good question, but I'm reading the name who it's from verbatim here. Okay, this is from Lord Poopington, and Lord Poopington is part of our. He's a loyal, or he or she, I'm not sure, is a part of our Discord. And I always enjoy checking out Discord, which you can see if you're part of the PHLY diehards. For tomorrow's mailbag, Lord sent this yesterday at 4:31 p.m. Who are the top 5 or 10 most valuable trade assets on the Eagles? I'm thinking of the Bill Simmons or Sheil Kapadia trade value rankings here. Look, I got to say, I was always a sucker for that Bill Simmons column growing up, and I always like when Sheil Kapadia does it. So when you do this, you're obviously not considering like realistic trades. Like you're not. It's not necessarily guys who you're trading, but it shows who's most valuable for your team.
You're not trading any of these guys.
Exactly, and you're factoring in age, contract, position. So do you want to go first here?
So I had 4 names.
Okay.
And you can fill in the blanks or did I miss somebody? But the 4 names that came to mind right away, the number 1 guy was Jalen Carter, where, still on the 2nd year of his rookie contract, frankly has shown that he has the talent to be one of the better defensive linemen in the game, has seriously high potential. I think he's, if we're factoring in contract as well, I think he's clearly number 1 on my list. And then it's like the Eagles have a lot of good players, but they got paid, right? And so I thought of the older guys that got paid. The one that stood out to me was Devontae Smith, where he's on this good contract for 4 or 5 more years. And is he better than AJ Brown? No, but he's younger and he's on a slightly better contract. That one stuck out to me too. And then the other name that really stood out to me is, and I don't know if he's good yet, right? We haven't seen him play in the NFL, but Quinyon Mitchell feels like a pretty good chance to be a starting level corner, and to have him on a rookie contract, that seems like something other teams would really covet. And the Eagles do covet now in terms of his value.
Good points there. Good points. I'm with you. I had Jalen, I had Jalen Carter number 1. I had Devontae Smith kind of 1A. I think the reasons you outlined for Jalen Carter makes sense. 2nd year player, premium position. I think he could be a top of the league player at that spot. Devontae Smith, who is already a top of the league player at wide receiver, I think that the Eagles signed him to a good contract. The one thing that is worth keeping in mind for NFL trades is that the guaranteed money, the signing bonuses, the team that trades him absorbs that money. If the guaranteed money's in the actual base salary, then the team that acquires him assumes it. So a player who's traded from the Eagles, actually, it could sometimes be a friendly contract for the team acquiring him if it's kind of loaded with bonus money. So that's something to consider there. I think Jalen Hurts would have a lot of value.
Sure,
and I think we've seen other quarterbacks get paid since they made that deal. I'm still high on Jalen Hurts. You look at the age profile, you look at the player profile. I think if they were to trade Jalen Hurts right now, they would get a haul for him. So he would be high up there. Same thing for AJ Brown. Even though they paid AJ Brown a big contract, I still think you're looking at a blue chip player, one of the best players in the league at his position. And then the other one I'll put in here is Jordan Mailata, because I think that for Jordan Mailata's play at left tackle at that age profile, I think if they were to trade Jordan Mailata, they would get a 1st round pick for him. I think he's still young enough and has shown high level production that even with that contract, they would do well there. And so you can mention Landon Dickerson. I think you're less apt to get big money for a big pick for a guard than a left tackle. I still think their edge rushers, Bryce Huff, Nolan Smith, have something to prove. I hear you on Quinyon Mitchell. I need to see it. The thing we need to remember with Quinyon Mitchell is like 21 teams passed on him, right? So now you can say that 8 teams passed on Jalen Carter. I think that was a different situation. 21 teams passed on Quinyon Mitchell with clean character, with really good athletic testing. And so I think Quinyon Mitchell is going to be a good player, but I still think there's more to prove there. Like Quinyon Mitchell from a draft range profile similar to Emmanuel Forbes a year ago, right? Now somewhere where around the world where Bo is, he's going to shudder and throw something at wherever he's eating dinner. I imagine he's listening to this at dinner right now. So what's up, Bo?
Did you see the photo of Emmanuel Forbes at his camp?
I did.
I mean, he looked like the camper. He's so skinny compared
All right,
to
so the one thing I'll say is that if you took a picture at Devontae Smith's camp, it'll probably be it'll look the same.
That's true, but Devontae Smith is good. So, yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah, and look, cornerbacks, we saw last year in that Eagles-Commanders game.
That was tough
A.J.
stuff.
Brown just pushed him off. So you want your cornerbacks to have some strength, some heft there. I say that still as I'm buying Nate Wiggins stock this year in Baltimore.
Sure. Yeah.
By the way, as we get to these questions, let's get to a Bo question. I'm really enjoyed doing the show with you. This is our 4th show together here. This going back to Friday. There's gonna be 3 more shows until Bo gets back. But let's give a little shout out to Bo because Ralph Jankowicz, actually, Ralph, he has 2 questions here. He asked, since Bo is out of town, it is a great time to talk about him. I would argue it's always a good time to talk about Bo. Predict his 2024 camp crushes. Also discussed who would play him in the Bo Wolf Story direct to premium streaming movie. I'll answer the second one first. There's one obvious answer here. It's Chevy Chase. Like Chevy. Am I wrong?
Like current day?
No. You look, what's like Vegas Vacation, Chevy Chase.
Okay.
Saturday Night Live, Chevy Chase. I think this is not me saying it. Like this has been the obvious one, and I think that's a compliment. Chevy Chase.
Have the sickos?
Yeah, Julia's nodding her head. That's a compliment.
Have the sickos suggested that before?
Oh, this has been a long running thing, Chevy Chase. Have you not heard that? I thought this was like a.
Well, you thought this was like common knowledge everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
I might have.
Yeah.
As I was about to say during the point about his camp crush,
Yeah.
I get a lot of this stuff with you guys, but sometimes there's a lot of content. It slips through the cracks.
Are you suggesting there's inside jokes on this show?
Yes.
Oh no way.
Yes, there is.
And then and then Arthur Smith, if Arthur Smith was an actor.
Sure.
But
Arthur Smith, I remember that one.
Yes.
And I agree with that.
Yeah. Arthur Smith's sister is in Hollywood, and so maybe
that's the most Zach line ever.
Could go to
Arthur
Central.
Smith's sister
Could
is
go
in
to
Hollywood.
Central Casting, which by the way, I learned because I read the comments on YouTube, and I appreciate this. We were told from yesterday's show when I said, "Is there actually a Central Casting?" It turns out there is a Central Casting, and they do this type of thing. They look for like doppelgangers.
They're just looking for generic looking people.
So I would say Chevy Chase would be the Bo Wolf way to go. Is there one you have for the actor?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
So the
camp crush.
The camp crush, and again, this is something that you probably you have a better recall on this because you've lived this for.
Oh, yes.
4 years, 5 years at this point. And look, I remember like the summer of Sua. I remember
the summer of Sua.
I remember the
that's what it's known as, the summer of Sua. Yes.
The August of ALLCITY. Like I remember all of that stuff.
I love this. Yes.
But again, you have a better recall of the many camp crushes because it's not just one, right? It's there's 3 or 4 some years.
Yes.
If one of them hits. So here is how I did it. Just thinking back to some of the past players, I went right to our lads, to the Eagles, and then I looked at the second string offensive line. I think that's a perfect place to start. Because Bo he prides himself on being the guy that watches the one-on-ones and not just the Jalen Carter one-on-ones, like the Brett Toth one-on-ones. He is there for.
Yes.
So I took a look at that, and so here's the name I came across, Zach, and I think it's wrong, but let's talk through it. Pass, and look, I get it. You're not going to be watching those one-on-ones. It's a passing league, right? You're going to be watching the 7-on-7. I am going with Trevor Keegan. But my worry is, though,
Friend of the show.
he's a friend of the show. He was a terrific interview with you
Yes.
guys. My only worry is he is not quite obscure enough.
Yeah.
5th round pick. I mean, that's pretty premium for the Bo Wolf Camp Crush. I feel like I might have reached too far for that one, but that's what I landed on.
You know your friend well, because I think that is too much of a premium there. Look, Dylan McMahon was a draft crush that I think could turn into a camp crush. I don't know what Bo's policy is in terms of the draft crush becoming the camp crush. I see Steve Whiteacre says Jason Poe.
Oh yeah, because of the build.
Yeah, I mean,
I get that.
He's already kind of scouted Jason Poe in a very very odd way in terms of being the camp crush. I think Andre Sam could be a potential camp crush. He might say Andre Sam isn't old, but I think when you're looking at it, like, that's a position where I think Andre Sam could pop at camp a bit. But I think I would go Jason Poe or Dylan McMahon for the camp crushes this year.
That's fair.
Yeah.
They could both be camp crushes too.
Yeah. It won't be Will Shipley. It won't be Will Shipley. I can say that. Yeah. Every time I say a nice thing about Will Shipley on the show, I think Bo will push back. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, you have Devontae Parker. He has Will Shipley.
Maybe he'll go Kendall Milton just to have his foil to Will Shipley. Although I think running back is probably too mainstream for him. Yeah. It's got to be like an interior offensive lineman there. So then let's keep rolling with questions here. And this is from Philip the Intern, which is, if the nose tackle, in parentheses, Jordan Davis, and the linebacker-style edge players, in parentheses, Nolan Smith and Bryce Huff, disappoint, and the defensive system does not seem to be maximizing Jalen Carter, could you see the Eagles wanting to move back to a Jim Schwartz-style defense? So you're attacking 4-3, penetrating defense.
Yeah, this one's more on you, because I understand the question, and that Vic Fangio usually 3-4, where he has the two outside edge rushers stand up and rush, and sometimes drop into coverage. Jim Schwartz, obviously 4-3. Yeah. Fletcher Cox, defensive tackles, get up the field. But you know this better than I do.
Sure. So, look, I'll say this about Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter played in like a 3-4, an odd man front at Georgia. Jalen Carter, to use the Jerry Azzinaro expression, and I'm really going esoteric there. If you remember the defensive line coach in 2013.
Come on.
Yep.
Of course.
Jalen Carter can play in any scheme. And that was a reference to how when Fletcher Cox was drafted, Jim Washburn said God made him to play in this defense. And then when we asked Jerry Azzinaro the next year, he said God made him to play in any defense, right? Because I think Jalen Carter can play in any scheme. I don't think you necessarily need to go to a Jim Schwartz-style defense to maximize Jalen Carter, although I understand the premise of the question. Like, you look at Ndamukong Suh, you look at Fletcher Cox, you look at Marcel Darius, you look at Albert Hainsworth. There's some deep tackles that really excelled in that scheme. I think, personally, unless there's a coaching change, and we'll actually get to that type of thing for the next question, I think the Eagles are committed to Vic Fangio. I think Vic Fangio is, the style of defense, but also Vic Fangio in particular, someone that they've targeted. I think that unless there is like a new coach who brings in his own D coordinator, the Eagles really like Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio is going to be here, and so it's going to be the Vic Fangio scheme. So I don't think they'll philosophically they'll change their defense. I also don't think it's productive to kind of ping pong back and forth between defenses, right? I don't think you should tailor a defense to a player, but I also don't think that unless you're starting a new system over, I don't like the idea of going back and forth.
And as much as Vic Fangio has kind of said, like, look, I'm going to take a look at each player's skill set, and I'm going to change the defense and kind of tailor it to their strengths. Like, there is a general scheme that he's going to work from. I mean, what do we have? Over a decade of history here where, he's running the same thing. But
I also think from a personnel perspective, really the only question is like, if you switch from an odd man front to an even man front, how Jordan Davis would do if he's able to be a 3 technique, or if he's someone that you're just kind of putting over the center. Otherwise, Nolan Smith and Bryce Huff, I think they can rush the quarterback from any defense. You might say that Nolan Smith needs to add some weight, add some strength. But I think that, honestly, if you look at like third down edge rushing, you're typically rushing from, the same way that a D end would in a 4-3. So that I think Jordan Davis is really the only question from a scheme perspective. But we mentioned potential coaching changes. This one was also on our Discord channel, and this was from Trezzolini. If the Eagles do not get off to a hot start, is Sirianni on the hot seat?
I was thinking about this because I was looking at the schedule and I was wondering, like, what is the record the Eagles would have to go for this to become serious? So, like, let's say they go 2-2 to start. Let's say they lose in Brazil to Green Bay, and then let's say they lose one of the NFC South road games at New Orleans, at Tampa. I would imagine the noise is like, because, by the way, that leads into a bye week as well. I would imagine the noise and the idea of being on the hot seat is discussed in Philadelphia. I don't think it would get there at that point, but like 2-3, if you lose to Cleveland coming out of the bye, maybe it becomes that way. I guess the one thing Sirianni has going for him is that the toughest part of the schedule seems to be, we never know. The NFL changes year to year, but it seems to be in November, which is kind of past the point of we're firing a coach to save our season, right? Like that's almost like a mercy firing at that point. Like that, if you fire somebody that late in the season, it's like, okay, we just don't want this person here anymore. We're going to make changes in the offseason. We will have kind of the caretaker coach, that type of thing. So if you look at the earlier schedule, look, they could lose, but it seems like not a super difficult part of the schedule, at least.
Yeah, I think that Jeffrey Lurie would be reluctant to making a change early. Like, even if they don't get off to a hot start, I think the commitment to Nick Sirianni is there for this year. I don't think they make the coaching change to try to rescue the year, so to speak. I think if there's a coaching change during the season, it's if the Eagles are like out of playoff contention late in the year and the Eagles want to get off, or like they want to get that head start on the coaching search, because maybe there's an out of work coach that you want to talk to, like you want to formally interview. So I think that would kind of be the only condition in place. I think even if they start like 1-3, let's say they use that scenario going into the bye week, I still think there's going to be this belief that they can work with Nick Sirianni. I don't think they're going to make a change to try to save the season. Before we get to the next question here, because I do want to get to a question about Nick Sirianni, I also want to tell you about our friends at Miller Lite. And the reason I say it is because I emphasize our friends at Miller Lite, because we're not just talking about a drink that tastes great and that's less filling. We're talking about all the great friends that you drink it with and those memories that you have when you're together. That's part of the appeal of Miller Lite. A lot's changed over the years. One thing that hasn't is the great taste of Miller Lite. Another thing that hasn't is that it's less filling. So what is the best thing about the original light beer? Miller Lite sparked that debate in 1975. They still haven't settled it. The great thing about Miller Lite, beyond the taste and the fact that it's less filling, is that when you think about watching that Phillies game last night and seeing Trey Turner hit that grand slam and seeing the sweat all over Will Smith, and it was hot there. That gray jersey did not go well with the sweat, right? I bet they would have enjoyed a nice cold Miller Lite at that time. But you might not remember the specifics of that game, but you'll remember who you watched it with. You'll remember being at the ballpark drinking an ice cold Miller Lite, or tailgating in the parking lot, or being at the bar, or being at your own home, enjoying the original light beer since 1975. You don't have to choose what's best. Miller Lite has great taste and is less filling. Tastes like Miller time. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/PHLY Birds, or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 96 calories per 12 ounces, fewer calories and carbs than premium regular beer. And then, look, I talk about it. I've mentioned it a few times on this show, being a diehard member. It's because you're getting premium written content for members at allphly.com. We had a day on Monday when Kyle Neubeck had a great Sixers story. Jim Salisbury had a great Phillies story. Charlie O'Connor had a great Flyers story.
Zach Berman had a great Eagles story.
We had Eagles coverage up there, and it's going to be that way. In that we cover every team extensively throughout the year. We have shows every day on every team. You get the best Philly sports newsletter delivered to your inbox every day. You don't need to be a diehard member to that, but you need to be part of the All PHLY community, which you'll get that from Rich Hofmann in your inbox. And then also, when you're finished reading our great coverage, you're finished watching our shows, and you want to go to games, you'll get great merchandise from all teams, and you get 20% off events that we host. You also get a free shirt when you become a member. And I mentioned that Discord lounge. You can join the PHLY lounge, the members only Discord. People always ask me how they can support the show, and one of the ways they can do it is becoming a diehard member, a PHLY diehard member. Head over to allphly.com and join the best sports fans in the city. I mentioned that Discord and the PHLY Lounge. One of the questions that we got from there it was a long question. It was a good one, and it was from Scott Rell 23, and he was kind of asking about the Nick Sirianni CEO coach model, and he talked about how Harbaugh and Tomlin are that CEO coach, and it's a successful model. He said, however, both of them, while extremely good, they're stoic leaders of men. I don't know that Sirianni is not that, but from the outside looking in, I don't see it. Maybe he is that too, but the sideline antics, jabbing with fans, and pandering to the city all distract from it. My question is, what have you seen from Sirianni that might lead one to believe that he can fill that role? Is there something that the public doesn't see that would lead you to believe that he can be that stoic, steady CEO type? So I'll jump in first here. And I'll say this, not that I need to defend Nick Sirianni, but I think you've seen it firsthand. I think you saw when the Eagles were in a tough spot in 2021, 2-5, and Nick Sirianni gives up the play calling, and that Roots speech got mocked publicly. But I think the way he kept that locker room together, the way he kept the team believing, Nick Sirianni's superpower, if you will, is his ability to kind of connect with people. It's his ability. You spoke. I was watching back to our show. I remember you saying it at the time, but I really liked it when you're talking about NBA coaches, and part of it is like managing egos, managing stars, right?
Like 90%.
Yeah, and look, the NFL, there's a schematic part of this, but that's a big part of it too. You have a locker room of 53 competitive people. It's a 90-man roster. You need to find a way to, I don't want to use the term inspire, but you need to connect with all these guys. You need to make them play at their optimum. There's so much that would kind of go into that, and I think Nick Sirianni's demonstrated that at an elite level.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say, because the idea of like Harbaugh and Tomlin being more stoic than Sirianni, and honestly, Sirianni reminds me of me a little bit in that, like, you can try and be rational and propose bad Keely Ringo trades in here, and but like honestly, like take a step back and have a more nuanced view of the team. But once the game starts and once the Eagles give up like a 7-yard completion in the first quarter, like I'm losing my mind.
Sure.
The difference is he's getting paid to actually steer the team. So I understand that. And I think he does need to change some of the stuff he does on the field, I would say. Like, I do think that is the case. Also, you mentioned like his ability to connect with players. And I think we've seen a lot of examples of him doing that. Like, the fact that Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox like really stood up for him, I think that means a lot to me. The one pushback I would say to that is, let's make sure you connect with the current quarterback, because there's frankly, like all 53 players, if you're 52 out of 53, but that's the one you're on a different page with, the results are not going to be so great. Now, in fairness, I don't know what the actual dynamic is like, but we have seen enough things where we can at least have some questions about how that is looking. But honestly, like you look at Mike Tomlin early in his career as well, like he was pretty fired up on the sidelines. Like I remember some of those Big Ben games when they were a Super Bowl contender, back like 2009, that era. Like he was pretty fired up on the sidelines. Like he was jacked up. He was high-fiving people, stuff like that. So maybe coaches can change a little bit, and like I thought that was cool when Mike Tomlin was doing that as well. I guess the point I'm making there is that coaches can change over time, right? And hopefully Nick is somebody who can at least look at, okay, this didn't work, this worked, and maybe kind of change his behavior in the way that he thinks is best for the Eagles.
I think you put it well. I don't think Nick needs to change his personality. I think he can modify his behavior. I think he's used this anecdote to me a few times where he's on the plane and he looks at the store, he looks at the flight attendant, and like if the flight attendant is calm, then he knows to be calm. And we heard Fletcher Cox in the studio right over there last year say that you're kind of getting that from the coach, and so I think that his body language matters, his demeanor matters, but I don't think he needs to necessarily change who he is. I think authenticity is important. I like the point you made about the connection with Jalen Hurts, because to use the NBA example, like JJ Redick, if he does a great job connecting with Dalton Connect, like that's great, but really it's about LeBron James, right? And Paul Westhead, when he was the Lakers coach,
Magic Johnson,
what's that?
Great example.
Yeah, you could be great with the rest of the team. It's what Magic Johnson thinks of you, right? And you go on down the list. In the NFL, Dan Reeves could do a great job. It's what John Elway thinks of you, right? So the relationship that matters most in there is the relationship between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts.
And the one positive, you did say, like, his player management, his ability to rally the team in year one was like special how good it was. Like, I thought that was a tremendous coaching job. It's just that we're 2 years away from that, and we had, frankly, a pretty bad coaching job at the end of this last year. So is that guy still in there? I think there's a chance there is.
Two more questions here. In your opinion, I'm sorry, this is from Ed Helinsky, Julia. In your opinion, is this current Eagles roster top 10 in the NFL? And I'll jump in. Yes, I do think they're a top 10 roster. I think there's a reason why they are top 10 in Super Bowl odds right now, and it's not because of Nick Sirianni. Like it's because of the roster, right? I mean, Nick probably factors into it, but when Bo and I did the skill position rankings, we had the Eagles high up on the list. If you do a quarterback ranking, there's going to be a lot of those in the coming days and weeks. Jalen Hurts is going to be in the top half of the league.
Absolutely.
There are questions, obviously, on the defensive side of the ball, but if you did an offensive line, if you did an offensive line ranking, Eagles would be top 10 in the league. I think that, and I've said this all along, and this kind of is one of the notes for this season, is that if the Eagles struggle, Jeffrey Lurie is not going to hold the roster against Howie Roseman. It's going to be on Nick Sirianni. And so I think that from the Eagles' perspective, they absolutely have a Super Bowl winning roster, or a Super Bowl caliber roster.
Well, I think it's pretty clearly a top 10 roster, Zach. And you know why? I Googled roster rankings, and 4 different publications ranked the Eagles in the top 10.
Then you know it's true.
In different places. Yeah. So I think one of the things was looking back to last year, though. I think most people heading into last season thought, okay, this is a top, maybe the best roster in the league. Like, I don't think many people had them lower than like a top 3, top 4 roster. And the one thing I would say is that we learned during the season the Eagles did not have the best roster in the league. And sometimes at around this point of the season, those rankings might over-index a little bit on past performance, where I think the issue last year is that you looked at the secondary and you saw Darius Slay and James Bradberry both coming off amazing years, but kind of a weaker crop of players behind them, and the fact that they were both older players. And one of them, in Bradberry, completely fell off a cliff. I think the good news is this year, when you look at the secondary, and this gets to the discussion we had at the top of the pod, is that like Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell and Keely Ringo, like not only do they have a chance to be good, but they have a chance to be good for a long time. They have a chance to be ascending players, but they probably don't get the same credit in those rankings because we haven't seen them do it that often.
Sure.
Just a little bit of Keely Ringo is all we've had from those 3 players, and even Isaiah Rodgers as well. Like that was a couple of years ago. Let's see how he looks when the games actually start. So I think when you look at the Eagles roster, what do you think, though, when I compare it to last season? Let's say something goes like wrong, though. What is the position group you think that if it turns out, man, this isn't a top 10 roster, what is the group that kind of falls apart and causes that to be the case? Because I would argue it was the secondary.
Yeah, good question. I would say the lines of scrimmage on both sides.
Yeah,
I think that the Eagles skill position players are outstanding. I think they've done work on their secondary. They lost a Hall of Fame center, and they lost a franchise Hall of Famer at defensive tackle, right? And I think that even when the Eagles have had, like the 2021 roster was not especially good at skill spots, was not especially good in the secondary, but they were really good in the trenches. And when you're good in the trenches, you have a chance to win. And I think that's proven that time and time again. And the Eagles have questions at right guard, right? If Lane Johnson goes down, How's Mekhi Becton as your top right tackle? Cam Jurgens, even though he's a natural center, there's a question there, right? And then you go to the other side of the ball. The Eagles lost their best pass rusher. They lost, I don't want to say their best interior player last year. I thought Jalen Carter was really good, but Fletcher Cox played at a high level. Did they adequately replace Hassan Reddick? Did they adequately replace Fletcher Cox, right? I think that the big question for the Eagles this year is the line of scrimmage.
I think it's the D-line. Yeah, you just wonder, especially if Jalen Carter misses any amount of time, like where are they getting their pass rush from? And I think the answer better be, it better be Bryce Huff, but I also, like you mentioned Nolan Smith earlier, it feels like we're not talking about him at all, and hopefully he can rebound from a very quiet first season.
Last question here. This is from Steamboat Philly. Right now, he was watching the Phillies-Dodgers game last night that we talked about. Right now, the Dodgers have a position player pitching. If you had to pick one Philadelphia Eagle to pitch an inning in a game, who would it be?
So I have two answers here.
Yep.
First one, A.J. Brown.
Okay, yeah.
Former baseball player.
Yep.
It's funny. You would think the number two answer for me would be Jalen Hurts. I watched a video of all the quarterbacks throwing pitches. They're not that good at it at all times. Now, like, would Jalen Hurts be like in my top 3 or 4 players? Of course. Like he throws a ball for a living. He gets paid a lot of money. I'm sure he could figure it out at some point. The other answer I had was Jake Elliott.
Yeah,
because Jake Elliott's
good at everything. Yeah, great hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
I had Jake Elliott on this list. The other player I had, please don't laugh when I say this, is
before you say it.
Is Zach McPherson. And the reason I have Zach McPherson was a really good baseball player growing up in Maryland. His brother, Matt McPherson, was a 4th-round pick who played in the Yankees farm system. Zach McPherson was recruited to Penn State to play both baseball and football. He was, if he just wanted to play baseball, he would have not just been drafted, but he would have been a decent draft pick, and he had options to play college baseball elsewhere. He was a center fielder. And so even though he wasn't a pitcher, if you're throwing the ball from center field, I imagine you can throw the ball from 60 feet, 6 inches. So I'm going with Zach McPherson for this list. Also for the two to kind of take this conversation even further. If you have your position player pitching, you don't want it to be one of your most valuable guys, right? You don't want to put Jalen Hurts on the mound. So you can put like the special team / cornerback and have him eat some innings. So I would go with Zach McPherson for this example.
Good answer.
So that was the mailbag. We are back tomorrow. Won't be Rich tomorrow, unfortunately, but fortunately we will have Jamie Lynch in this seat, and Jamie and I will be talking fantasy football. We will be talking about the Eagles' top options. We'll be talking about some options in the NFL as well. Like I said, Friday we'll be going through the 2025 NFL draft with Devin Jackson from the Inquirer. I will have an Eagles-only mock draft, 3 rounds, coming out Friday morning. I have some other Eagles content coming on allphly.com as well in these next 2 days. And that all gears up to next week when the countdown to training camp continues. I've enjoyed doing these 4 shows with you, Rich, and I hope I'm allowed to say, you said on the show last week, you're heading overseas pretty soon. You'll be at the Olympics, so make sure. Well, I was gonna say you're not doing the newsletter from overseas, I imagine.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you can, when Rich gets back, you can check that newsletter in your inbox every day. But we hope you have a great time overseas. I hope Nice is nice, and Paris.
3 days in a row for that one.
Yeah, good. Paris is not quite like Paris, and Vegas, but it's the next best thing.
Great food city.
Yes, I've heard that. I've never been to it, but I've been to Paris. That's very good.
All right, I appreciate it, man. This has been a fun 4 days. Just in the dead time of the off season, it was good, man.
What's the dead time? This was fun. So thank you to Rich. We hope you have a great vacation. Thank you to Julia, as always. We will be back tomorrow with Jamie. Bo would say, as always, we love you. I would say, we'll be better tomorrow. Thank you for watching.
We all silly like the mayor.